So today I'm doing something a little bit different, and I wanted to share a little bit about my experience with the Chinese Communist Party and why I believe that the US should proceed with banning members of the Communist Party from coming here or obtaining visas. I'm speaking as someone that very much has a love-hate relationship with China, and I want to emphasize the love part. I'm married to a Chinese citizen and raising my son to have an appreciation for Chinese culture, to speak Mandarin, and I love the people of China deeply. By the same token, what I've seen the Chinese government continue to morph into, even in the past few years, is extremely frightening to me and is one of the reasons that our family left China. So, I first came to China over a decade ago, and I remember my first trip as a university student participating in a cultural exchange program and the shock that I felt when a student who had become my close friend over the summer told me one day that she was going to a ceremony for her membership in the Communist Party. Admittedly, I think it was my first time visiting a communist country, and I think that some of the reasons I was very seduced by China in a lot of ways is that it wasn't at all like what I imagined a communist country to be. Maybe like those pictures you have in your head of um, old Russia. So it was very different just seeing how communism was lived out under the Chinese system. I quickly learned that it was treated as a professional club of sorts by many people and the leg in the door that they needed to secure reliable employment and faster opportunities for promotions. And so the time that I spent in China was really a journey. And then in 2010, when I moved there, admittedly, I had evolved into someone who didn't consider China a threat to the West. I found that attitude really silly, to be honest. And Chinese people are extremely friendly, fun. They're easy to make conversation with, and they enjoy their friendships. And so, this culture, while it's entirely different from the one that I grew up in, is really intriguing and it's worth experiencing. Especially for someone who arrives in China not speaking Chinese, some of the subtleties of the reasons that people make certain decisions might be lost. I know that was the case with me. They were lost on me. I didn't speak Chinese when I moved there. But it was shortly after moving there that the autonomous region that I was living in experienced a lot of unrest as a result of the government's unjust treatment of the ethnic group in that region. And as someone who had many friends of that ethnicity, I was really horrified to learn that many of the contacts that I had made and developed relationships with had disappeared after the protests broke out. And I never saw several of them ever again and heard nothing more about them. And it should have been more of a wake-up call for me at that moment, but I think in some ways I wanted to believe the government's narrative that, well, they must have been involved in something bad, and it wasn't really until I spent a long period of time in China that I began to wake up to what the realities of that situation were as well. For all the friendliness on the surface, there are a lot of darker things that were happening in China, have always been happening in China, and especially now are just continuing to happen, and it's becoming um, a situation at the level of just horrible genocide and horrible oppression today. So I think that I kind of shared in some of the attitudes that many did at the time. Um, a lot of us were hopeful and we were rooting for China's success, but we had this naive belief that as they grew economically, they would reform politically and socially, and that was a disastrous miscalculation. And a lot of times, I think foreigners who go in not understanding the realities of China being unlike any other country in terms of how that oppression actually is carried out and looks, we can kind of feed into that in our own naive way. So I felt very secure living there for a long time, but when Xi Jinping came to power, I think I really started to get concerned, more concerned than I was. I've always loved politics and I studied political science before, and I immediately recognized that his platform of stamping out corruption was actually a move to stamp out his dissenters in the Communist Party. And so I was the only one who felt that way. Um, he has a very gentle appearance, and so a lot of Chinese people were very quickly seduced by him. And as the years under his rule progressed, I only heard a few friends express some level of concern over his doing away with term limits. But I did see how his anti-Western agenda affected my life, affected my family's lives, and also affected the lives of those around me. and how, as he set out to really define what being Chinese meant uh, as Han Chinese culture, not just Han Chinese culture, but Han Chinese culture as defined by the Chinese Communist Party, it became more and more alarming. And so, without going into the whole story of the past few years, in which we witnessed a lot of horrible things happening, I'm brought to this point. I've been called ungrateful by friends who knew me for years for calling the government out as if I owed them silence. This is the attitude that they have bullied and brainwashed Chinese people into. And so at this point, even as many of the friendly, wonderful people that I know and love in China are members of the Communist Party, I believe that the United States should take the step of banning CCP members from obtaining visas. The CCP today is a genocidal, racist regime that is inflicting terror on Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Christians, Buddhists, Hui Muslims, political dissidents, human rights lawyers, journalists, and many, many others. And while abuse of these groups is not new, the level with which it has increased and China's bold confidence that it won't face consequences, it won't be checked, mean that we must take more drastic steps to address it. And like it or not, being part of the CCP is being part of a regime that is carrying out active genocide. People cannot be allowed to continue to reap the benefits of democracy, especially those who are wealthy from their CCP alliance, while they deny democratic freedoms to billions of people. The same people that are spending millions of dollars to run propaganda campaigns deny their own citizens the use of open internet. The CCP today is a terrorist regime, and the fact that we would still desire to continue to normalize a relationship with them or worry about hurting people's feelings is absolutely ridiculous. I don't hear any of those arguments being made for example, if we look back historically at World War II and the Nazis, there were lots of people who were involved in the Nazi Party who were swept up in this ultra nationalism. Maybe they weren't the ones who were holding guns to people's head. Maybe they weren't the ones who were watching bodies be shoveled into ovens, but they were complicit in an awful, horrible genocidal regime. And so whether it hurts people's feelings or not, it is time for people to be forced to choose between this evil government system and having something else. I love the Chinese people. I desire better for them, and the Chinese Communist Party must be stopped.